We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that says we have freedom of expression, and I saw conflict there. So I let the government know I was going to ask the court to strike down that part of the act that says you can't make treatment claims for violating freedom of expression. And I started preparing. So I go to this herb shop. It was just a little mom and pop shop, Natural Way Herbs. And I say, Jim, is there any way we can show you're telling the truth? And he, oh yeah, just wait a minute. And he goes into the back and he starts bringing me out boxes. It's like 4 or 5 boxes just filled with letters that people just wrote in because they felt compelled to do so, and they were all the same. I had heart disease, I was dying, I took your heart drops, I got well, thank you. No, I can't enter those. I had thousands of them. They're useless in court, that's hearsay evidence. But I can call the authors, I can put them on the stand, they can swear to tell the truth, and they can tell the truth, and that's the highest level of evidence in court. So I started phoning these people and getting their stories, and it was all the same. So I actually got to pick. Like, it's a pleasure when a lawyer can like just pick and choose witnesses. So I picked all middle-class professionals, because in court, like, they just have credibility. All of them had had heart disease. All of them had had at least one open heart bypass surgery. In fact, one CBC filmed it. They did a documentary on the guy. Some of them had had more than one open heart bypass surgery. They all continued to have heart disease because the medical doctors weren't dealing with what was causing the arteries to plug up in the first place. They all needed another bypass surgery to live, and here's where they differed. A couple of them were not willing to go through it again. They'd had so many complications, like, sorry, we'll just die. And a couple of them, the doctors weren't willing to put them through because the doctors didn't think they'd live through the surgery, so it'd be unethical to do that. So for all of these people, the medical system was a death sentence now. It was a dead end. So, and none of them were into the natural health. They all were forced to look into the natural health community. They all come across these heart drops. They all get well. They all go back to work. None had been able to work. And in preparing for that trial, I had to do a paradigm shift. You see, before I thought the danger was leaving the product on the market. And now, the truth was the danger was taking it off the market. And in fact, at that time, I could have given you the names, addresses, and phone numbers of thousands of people whose lives would have been adversely affected, many of whom would have died. Okay, this is life and death, okay? I mean, you saw the True Hope story there. I believe when Health Canada restricted access to that product for a short period of time that there were deaths. I believe that because people like Ron Lajeunesse, the Canadian Mental Health Association, started holding press conferences blaming Health Canada for suicides. I watched him testify under oath, and he said he even went to one of the funerals because people ran out of E-Empower Plus. And I've read the notes taken by Health Canada employees, where 800 pages of them, where people are begging for their lives and saying things like, what are you going to do when I commit suicide? Okay, well, that's another product where I believe if you took it off the market, we'd literally have thousands of deaths in Canada. So the point I'm trying to make is the real danger is taking the products off the market. And I'm not saying there's not room for reasonable regulations, but what I'm saying is if we're going to do this for our safety, we can't be doing what we're doing because we're actually going to kill people. That's the honest-to-God truth. We are going to cause deaths. We're going to cause suffering. So what we're doing, we have it backwards. We actually have it backwards. It's funny, you know. Do any of you guys remember Bill C-420 years ago? It was to amend the Food and Drug Act and move natural health products into the food category. And amazingly, some groups like the CHFA opposed it. I still can't get my head around it. But I remember testifying in front of the Standing Committee of Health on that bill, and I asked new regulations were not quite in force. They were about to come into force, and I asked them 2 questions. So I asked them, I said, okay, let's say you, Standing Committee of Health, you don't do anything, and you let these regulations come into force, and we come back here in 10 years, how many lives will these new regulations have saved? It really was a rhetorical question. You haven't had a death in all of our history. Surely to goodness we're not going to have a death in the next 10 years when you take most of them off the market, are we? So the answer would be 0. But I asked them the next question, and then this didn't go over well with them, is I said, okay, you let these regulations come into force and drive the majority of our products off the market, and we come back here in 10 years, how many lives will the regulations have cost? No, how can we be doing this? How can we, as a society, be dragging farm wives out of vehicles and terrorizing 4-year-old kids and taking products away from people that need them, taking products away from trained natural healthcare practitioners who are using them to treat their patients? How do we do this? Like, this is uncomfortable, isn't it? And we have to act. We can't let this go on. You know, it's funny, every time I lecture or go anywhere, people come up to me and they just say, "Oh, thank you so much for what you're doing." But you know what? And I'm going to yell at you, because this is important, is until I can come to a lecture and thank everyone there for what they're doing, my kids are going to be slaves. Do you understand that? Because I can do what I do, and it's not going to make an ounce of difference. It's not. It's not working. We are losing our freedoms. There are people like me doing what we're doing. We're losing our freedoms. And it's going to keep going until I can come here and say, "Thank you for what you were doing. Oh, that was over the top. That was so good what you did. That initiative you started, I couldn't believe it." Until I can start doing that, my kids are going to be slaves. And your kids are going to be slaves, and your grandkids. Because do any of you like the trajectory of where we're going? No. No. So, you know, my message is get off your ass. Like, you have to. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but even the converted understand we're not doing enough. We're doing some, but we're not doing enough. And we have to start taking action. Like, we absolutely, I need every single person in this room to become an activist. And I honestly do know that some of you are super active, and I thank you, but the majority of you aren't. And you have to, this has to be personal. I mean, the reason why these lectures, you know, we have some uncomfortable moments is because you know that what I'm saying is true, it's resonating, and you don't like the trajectory. We have to do something about it. And if enough of us do it, we can. So I certainly want you to support what we're doing at the NHPPA, and I'll just share very briefly what we are doing because I'm very proud of it. We've got basically a 3-part strategy to try and solve the crisis in our natural health industry. And the first thing is we want the government to simply suspend these regulations, take a step back, and let's review it. It's the first time we've tried to regulate these products specifically. Let's stop the bloodletting. And let's just ask, okay, what's working, what isn't working, and let's come up with regulations that will actually increase our access, that aren't going to hurt us. If that fails, so if I can't get enough of you to be activists, if that fails, then we're building a war chest for a lawsuit because we believe the regulations as they stand are unconstitutional. If anyone wants to talk to me about that, I can explain why I think it is, and we also have it on our website. And the third initiative is the Charter of Health Freedom, which was already spoken about earlier. It doesn't belong to the NHPPA. Several groups got together, practitioners, citizens. We held a couple of conferences, and we asked the simple question, how do we stop this? Because we're always reacting, right? We're losing products and we react negatively. They want to pass Bill C-51, we react negatively. But nobody's actually coming up, well, how do we solve it then? We're always fighting a rearguard action instead of going forward. And we came up with the answers to the Charter of Health Freedom. And the first thing we did is we looked at actually, well, what health rights do we have? Do you know that if your life depends on a health product, it can be a chemical pharmaceutical, it can be a natural product, doesn't matter what it is, if your life depends on it or you would suffer without it, and Health Canada says you can't have it, and you go to court, do you know what percentage of the time the court says Health Canada has to take a walk? 100%. And they just come out with wonderful statements that you have a fundamental right to choose how you're going to treat yourself when you're legitimately suffering. And so we actually just took those rights because they're ignored. We didn't create any of them, and we set them out in a charter. It's meant to be a health bill of rights that the government has to pay attention to and that every other